Thanks everyone for joining us on time for today's masterclass, for today's experience design masterclass. We really appreciate that. Very, very quickly, let's just get started with the introduction of Suhail Gupta, who's our speaker for today. Suhail is extremely passionate about design thinking, design systems. He loves talking about design, productivity, investments, tech, and of course, movies. I'll also tell you why he's such a special guest for me in particular. He's a product designer at Urban Company. He's having over 5 years of experience in digital product design for products in home delivery spaces, in services, electricity, electric mobility, Internet of Things, banking, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and the list just goes on. He's skilled at branding, content strategy, information architecture, UI design, UX design, and that's exactly what you have. You have this experience design masterclass today. Also very good at prototyping. Very passionate about design thinking and design systems, which makes him an apt speaker over here. And like I said, why I'm really excited to host him, because he's also an alma mater of Amity International Saket. He's also completed his engineering from Delhi College of Engineering. Pretty young, but yet enthusiastic to share his knowledge. Sohail, over to you. Really looking forward to this experience design masterclass. We'll let you spearhead from here.
Thank you, Nija, for that introduction. Makes me sound like more of an achiever than what I feel I actually am. But yeah, like everything's true, of course. I did high school in Amity, graduated from Delhi Technological University, and I've been in the industry for something like 7 years. 5.5 years is full-time now. And I've worked currently as a product designer at Urban Company, and previously worked for Onething, who is also the co-creator of the user experience MasterCamp at Masters Union now. And yes, have worked on a variety of projects, award-winning projects for Revolt, Super Daily, Wibmo, RPL Bank. And the list, of course, is rather long, so won't get into any of that. And yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. And let's just get straight into it. I am thinking we'll just try and keep the first half of this masterclass focused more on what I wish everyone knew whenever they applied for a job, let's say, as a product designer. Largely because I've realized there's quite a bit of a gap in what everyone thinks is product design or UX design or UI design. And, the terms are also used interchangeably sometimes by us as well. And also what, most people on the outside think the profession is and demands from us. So for the first half an hour, I'll largely go through that piece. And then for the second half an hour, let's just focus on all the questions that everyone has. And I'll try and address them as clearly as possible, and, make sure everyone understands the job itself, and then what, of course, it takes to get into this industry and then, learn, succeed, grow, and of course, make an impact, which is, I think, the main reason why, I am in the industry. I love the idea of being able to make that sort of an impact on products. And I hope everyone on this class shares that same zeal over that. Great. Okay, so the clickbaity article aside, the focus of this will largely be on three things. Firstly, to make sure everyone understands what the jobs are. In fact, if you'll go through the list, I think we designers have invented quite a lot of words for what we do, and broken it into a lot of things, some of which is fairly straightforward, some of which is just very ambiguous, and a lot of it which overlaps. Some of it we use to designate seniority, which also adds to the confusion and everything. But the main thing which I would want to talk about is I've often seen people throw around these words, especially during the application process, without really knowing what any one of them truly means, or what does the role specifically demand, as a skill set, or as a as what your day-to-day will be on these various roles. So most of you, I'm sure, would look at this list and you would want to apply for around 5 of them. That's just probably by design as well at this point. Of course, hopefully by the end of this, you know exactly what you would want. And let's get around to that. Often, especially for entry level people in the industry, I think the biggest gap is simply to know what the work itself is. What does a UX copywriter do that's different from a content writer? What does a content designer do that's different from a graphic designer? And how is that different from a motion designer? How is that different from an information architect? And then there's a UX architect, and are those the same things? Are there different things? There's a lot of muddy explanations of what all of these roles are. We're all just trying to define our work, which is fairly new. If you think about it, in some ways this profession is not really older than 10 or maximum 15 years. If you think about it, the App Store was invented in 2008. And that's basically led to most of the booms that we are aware of. Uber, Airbnb, Google apps, and all of these things are very new in terms of a profession. So everyone has come up with their own definitions of what each role is. What I'm thinking I should be doing is, let's just look at an app I think everyone in this room would know, and ask some basic questions around it, and then see whose job is it to have the right answer to those questions. So yeah, this is the Swiggy homepage as of my phone this morning. So the first question is, what is where? If that's the question, the answer is, it's decided by information architecture. Information architecture decides what is visible, where is it visible, how do you navigate around a page, what is in the footer, what is in the header, what is on the page, and where does it go to. If you want to ask why is it there, the answer is UX design. UX design primarily decides where and why something is on the page. Everything is trying to serve a purpose. It's either a purpose for you or a purpose for the business, but there's a purpose. And UX largely tries to take control of that piece to make sure everything is where you expect it to be, or it's laid out in an intuitive manner, or it is there because we know what effect having that on in front of you has on you, and that drives a business metric that is important to the product. How does it look is visual design. The font, the color choices, the typography and its hierarchy, a very big thing in typography, the icon and their consistency and their looks and everything. Also how something is shown as selected versus how something is shown as not selected. How does something look tappable and something not look tappable, white space, everything is visual design. How does it behave is interaction design. So if you were to tap, what happens as an interaction? If you were to swipe, what happens on the carousel as an interaction? If you were to scroll, what happens? If you were to try and put something in the search bar, how does that behave? If you leave it halfway, what happens? If you try and clear it, what happens? All of that is basically the realm of interaction design. What does the screen or app say? That is UX copywriting. Copywriting is fairly new as a concept. It used to always be clubbed as part of UX design. Now it's become more of a separate exercise on its own. The idea, of course, being copy is the main way you understand what's happening and what does it mean. Like, what's the difference between saying, for example, account or your account or my account? Those are three interchangeable ways to describe the same thing, but they all have different effects. And there's also an element of consistency. I mean, what if one part of the app says your account and then something else says my card? Why not have them line up? So all of that falls into the realm of UX copywriting and microcopy. Why does it say that? This is often something that is fed by UX research. UX research largely tries to focus on what do users want, need, expect from a product nowadays. What is the benefit of using certain words over others? What is the benefit of, say, up to 30%, but then there's also flat, then there's dining out. How do you use these words? What do they mean? And what effect do they have on you? That's all UX research. On top of that, UX research also tries to standardize patterns, or understand patterns that are standard and understood by people now. It tries to understand what the competition does, and use that as an lever to make sure we are aware of what the competition does, and therefore what users expect even this product to do. Everything is fed by UX research. So if you're liking the banners, they were done by a graphic designer. If the Navratri special, for example, graphic looks good to you, if those banners look nice and they have animation and motion in them, then there was a graphic designer and a motion designer who worked on this. If you like the content, there was a content designer who worked on this. Now, the content designer could be a person, it could be an entire team, which could be composed of, UX copywriters, like we talked about, content writers, graphic designers, and motion designers. All of that, falls into the bucket of content. This is especially a very big thing in products that have a lot of dynamic content. I mean, Swiggy has one homepage, but that one homepage could have 100,000 different pieces of content inside it. So that's all content design. If you like the interface in general, if you like the UI in general, that's UI design. And a UI designer, again, can be one person. It can be a team just doing UI design. That team could be, visual designers, interaction designers, probably motion and graphic designers as well. They all combine together and make sure the interface itself looks good. And then if you like the experience of using the app, that is basically the combination of how it looks like, how it's laid out, everything is clubbed together. That becomes, the job of a UI UX designer to make the entire experience a great thing for people to have. And lastly, if you like the app itself, that's probably because there was a product designer who put in a lot of sweat into it, or a team of product designers. And of course, product designers do not work on this alone. They work on it with an entire team. But yeah, I think hopefully this would help you understand what each one of these different roles largely take care of on the same real estate, which is, the homepage of an app, for example. So this is one way to look at what the entire ecosystem of product design or UI UX design actually incorporates. It's always an interplay between the visuals, the behavior, and the content. So if you were to focus strictly on visual designer, for example, you would be labeled a visual designer. If you strictly focused on content, you would be a content writer or UX copywriter. If you strictly focused on just the behavior, you would be an interaction designer, or possibly, if you were doing low fidelity versions of that, you would be like a UX architect or like an information architect. Where they start blending together is where your roles start to overlap more. You can sort of think that a UI designer is someone who takes care of UI and who takes care of visuals and behavior to a certain degree, because the combination of them becomes your interface. If someone takes care of, all the written and the visual content, they tend to be labeled as a content designer. If someone takes care of, the content and its behavior, they tend to be labeled UX designers. And then, of course, if you bucket UI UX together, you get a UI UX designer. And if this UI UX designer is working on something that is effectively the product itself, for example, if you were working at Swiggy, if you're working on the UI UX, you're almost working on the product itself, because the product is the app. And if you're responsible for the interface and experience of the app, you may as well be responsible for the interface of the product itself. So you could say a product designer sits right in the middle of visuals, behavior, and content. There, of course, other ways to look at it. Of course, this is the workflow that you could largely simplify it to. It's more of you start with a problem statement. Depending on what the context is, this problem statement is either something you believe is a problem, or it's a problem statement that's given to you by someone else, a client, doesn't matter. But you generally start with a problem statement. Your research and UX phases tend to be more exploratory. They want to know more about the problem. They want to know about, possible solutions, previous solutions to the problem, and basically arrive on what they think will be a solution to it. And as you're arriving to that solution, you'll start giving it fidelity using, skills of UI. And as you give that solution fidelity over time, and then you make it, to a point where it's a very high quality prototype, or it's something that, can be immediately given to a developer to actually create in code, then you would say, you've done the UI part of it. So you can look at this tree, which you can look at this line of sorts where it starts from understanding the problem, conceptualizing a solution, and finally delivering a solution. So in between them, you have a lot of hypothesis testing and problem explorations and condensation into what can be proposed solutions. Then you come up with a solution, you again iterate, give it fidelity, incorporate feedbacks, improve on it until finally you feel it's ready and you ship it or deliver it. One more thing that is generally something we don't talk about much in this, but it's basically the difference between a specialist and a generalist. So now that I say it, I think the words are fairly intuitive, but specialists are people who tend to, build one skill and build it to a very high level. So for example, that skill could simply be, let's say, prototyping or visual design. And these are generally the folks who get hired in larger teams or organizations, primarily because those organizations have an entire team where they need different people to focus on more specific roles. So specialists work way better on that. They, of course, have a lot of team structure around them all the time. And their growth generally comes from either expanding their skill set. So for example, you are a good visual designer, but over time you learn basics of motion and interaction as well. And then, you're a UI and you're a visual and an interaction designer, which in some definitions could make you a UI designer. So generally that's where one, way your growth comes. You start expanding your skill set, or you use that same skill set, get better at it and better at it until you're paid more, either in the same company or by switching to a company that's larger or more specialized in that role. So yeah, that's generally what a specialist is. And a generalist is someone who is more like a jack of all trades. They can perform a variety of tasks. They are generally the people who can do everything across the board, not in a great specific manner, or not in an award-winning manner, but at least they can get by competitive research, prototyping, UI, UX, whatever the project demands from them. They tend to be hired more in small teams or startups, or even sometimes in larger companies, but to work only on a specific project and then own that project end to end. So that's a fairly common practice. In a smaller startup, they prefer generalists as well, because the problems are, of course, smaller in scale, more vague. There's not much of an organization structure to take care of all your needs, and the work just needs to happen faster and with fewer resources usually. So generally, these people also have a high ownership of some problem area, like let's say improving revenue or increasing growth or improving the website. They have very high level mandates, and growth for these people comes from a series of successful projects, and that just invites the company to give them more things to take care of over time. And then at some point, maybe they'll put people under them or something along those lines, so that their territory or whatever they're in charge of keeps expanding over time. And yeah, to be super clear, it's not like one is better than the other, but this is an important thing to mention. I'll bring it a couple of times later in this presentation as well. But the idea is to be very clear on what kind of a person you are likely to be. And specialist and generalist is a very important distinction that will be useful for you later on. Cool. So now that we've taken a look at what the work is, now let's also take a look at where this work is. There are largely three types of domains or industries, not actually not even domain industries. There's three kinds of places where you can be a designer. The first one is sort of nowhere. You are your own company. So I mean, this visualization is probably not going to make sense to you, but think of it as this is, possibly your entire skill set. And this is all the projects you'll do. So you tend to have complete ownership over every project. Sometimes, I mean, a freelancer can get someone else to help them for something specific, but generally freelancers tend to take care of the entire thing on their own. And you have very little control over what you work on and where you work on exactly in your skill set. So, sometimes there'll be a huge gap. Sometimes there'll be some tiny projects that only need one small piece of your skill set. For example, like all I need you to do is just this small piece of research, where someone else will come and say, I need you to do, the entire thing, make my entire product. So the prerequisite for being a good freelancer is you need a very, very good set of soft skills. You have to manage your clients, yourself, your time, your project, of course, and depending on who your clients are, sometimes you will basically need anger management as well. It's very heavily focused on branding yourself and promoting yourself. Presentation skills is very important. It sort of even dictates how much you'll be taken seriously and how much you'll even be paid. A lot of it just depends on how well you're able to present something. And yeah, you need aside from obviously the skill set, you also need some good legal and financial understanding to get your way around contracts and manage your own taxes and do a couple of things. So the basically pros and cons of being a freelancer. Pros are you get very quick exposure to a variety of industries. It's very good for networking, and you work on a variety of problem statements. You have a lot of autonomy and you can learn at your own pace. At the same time, there are some very clear cons. The biggest one is that nobody realistically hires a freelancer to, for example, redesign Airbnb. That just doesn't happen. So you'll only be working on relatively smaller problems, smaller projects, low impact overall on anything. You don't have any control over the final output. This is basically you'll give a design and then you don't control what happens with it, how it's executed, developed, shipped, what happens to it after that. And clients and your pay tends to be very erratic. Some, like, you should just assume half of your payments would probably not come or be negotiated on, and issues like that will keep happening. Clients are all over the place. Some are great clients, some will not be. But yeah, that's basically the freelance side of things. The other side of it, I think these two other ones most people will be interested in. The first is what it's like in a design agency. So in a design agency, your group is fairly set. You're going to be working on something very specific and you'll keep working on that. For example, you will be a visual designer and you'll largely be asked to work as a visual designer on a variety of projects. So there's always going to be a big team that is responsible for the entire project cycle or the entire design cycle. Your quality would be enforced in some ways by someone in as a senior or who's a leader in the team. Basically every new project is essentially a fresh start because you keep coming back to it again and again. And because of these reasons, I would say if you are a specialist or want to be a specialist, a design agency tends to work better for you because it's easy to keep getting work of the same skill over and over again. So pros and cons, again, pros are good exposure, like freelancing to a variety of industries. One project could be ed tech, the other project could be fintech, the third project could be electric mobility, fourth could be banking, These are all like literally projects I've worked on as part of an agency, and therefore you get a lot of variety of industries that you can work on and product problems related to several industries. So that's a good part. Access to mentorship, learning, and guidance. It's always, you're always working with designers, under designers, sometimes over designers, but there's always a lot of learning happening. Everyone's a designer, so they talk design, they want to improve their skills, they share knowledge, and it's great for those sort of things. Another good thing that an agency is generally good for is moving from one skill set to another. So especially because everyone around you is, working on the same piece. So if you're a visual designer and over time you want to move into UX design or the research side of it, it's not too hard to, move into that. You just basically try and convince someone over time to give you more of those sort of things which you want to do. And over time, you're able to get into that work itself, learn from people who are already doing that, for example, and you can transition between skill sets and you can upskill. You can learn more skills. So agencies are great for that. But cons again are low control over the final output. Similar to freelancing, most of the time you don't control what happens to anything you've designed after it's been given to a client. The cyclic nature of a job is basically every time a new client comes, you start over. So for a lot of people, that tends to be exhausting. And the nature of problems is generally rudimentary. So I'll explain what 0 to 1 design is. And this is something that happens frequently in agencies. A lot of the clients who come to an agency are people who generally don't have a product at all. So it's like, make me a product, or make me an onboarding flow. I don't have one. So that's sort of a 0 to 1 design, where 0 is it didn't exist, and then 1 is you make it exist. So generally the work you're doing tends to be in this bucket. You'll keep creating new and new onboarding flows, for example, for different clients. And if you're more excited about going beyond that at some point, agencies generally don't offer you a great way to do that. And the third one, I think, is a product company. As you can see, basically it's going to test your entire skill every time on every project. And if you're doing well, your projects will get a bit bigger, they'll get a bit harder, your domain will increase over time. But yes, at any point, basically in a product company, you're expected to have end-to-end ownership of something within the product. So for example, they might just give you a page in the app or a flow within the app to start with, but you're responsible for everything in that flow. And in general, it works better for someone who's a generalist, primarily because the project demands are so unpredictable and there's so much variety in them. Every project effectively needs a new playbook. It'll test some of the skills which you didn't think you would have or didn't think you would need. It's a very cooperative effort with tech, business, and generally content as well. And your projects are effectively continuous, they're cyclic, so they need constant feedback, they're constantly prioritized, deprioritized, and there's constant alignment that you need to have with everyone, pretty much in the tech side of the company, or sometimes even the business side of the company, about what you're building, why you're building it, what do you think it'll achieve, and everything along those lines. So pros and cons of, I would say, a product company. It's high impact, which I think is the best part about working in a product company. You have very strong control over what eventually is shipped and why, and you can directly track, your impact. It's like anyone who, for example, designed the Urban Company homepage can very clearly say that I designed this homepage and there was no ambiguity about it. Nature of the problems keep evolving. So I mean, rarely in a product company will someone come to you and say, oh, we don't have an onboarding flow, can you just make a new one? Sometimes it happens if it's for, say, some other app or this or that, but generally it's an evolving problem. An onboarding flow already exists, and what you're doing is over time you're constantly tweaking it, optimizing it. A lot of that means going deep into the product and figuring out why the current one doesn't work, or what can we optimize in the actual flow right now. This is what I label as one to end design, which is basically you start with something existing, but over time you're optimizing and improving it, and it's a constant improvement. You improve it however it needs to be improved, and your influence compounds over time. So you might start off by working on a very small piece, but over time you'll get bigger and bigger and bigger problems. And yeah, like your influence in product keeps improving. The cons of a product company are, again, it's very iterative. For some people, it's okay. For some people, it, you know, starts giving you a feeling of when is this ever going to be over? But of course, in a product company, nothing's ever over because the product keeps existing. And as long as it exists, there's a problem to solve in it. Your industry exposure tends to become very limited. I mean, there are ways to keep abreast of what's happening, but yeah, like if you work in, say, only the ed tech space for 5 years, you will, of course, not over time get to know what's happening in other industries. And in product companies, it can be quite hard to keep your creativity going, primarily because, I mean, in the end, you're working on the same problem again and again. And after a point, you just do not have that much creative sort of solutioning to what is the same problem you've been looking at year after year. So yeah, like this is, I think, the pros and cons of the three main ways you can work in any design role. It's either going to be in a product startup, it's going to be in an agency or an agency like model. For example, if you were working in a consulting firm, that's also largely an agency like model. And if you were to freelance, then these would be the three big basic pieces, and they all have their pros and cons. I know I've done all three at this point. So I think what we've discussed so far is probably not sounding very relevant to you at this point, because I mean, the title was How to Land a Job. What I feel is most important for everyone is you need to know what is the thing so that you know where you belong in it. A lot of people I've seen apply for the wrong roles, or apply for the role and then not really know what happens in that role. They apply in product thinking it works like agencies, and that ambiguity doesn't really help you over time. I mean, in the end, it's your career and it's your life. You're basically committing to a certain style of working. So it's very important for you to know what that style of working is, let alone anything else that you might think is important about the profession. The money, the workload, the company culture, all of these are more random variables. They keep changing. You can find agencies which are very chill. You can find product companies which, make you work very hard, or the flip. And all of those things are a bit more random. But the main thing is, if you choose a career, it's important to know what kind of a career you're picking and why. And for that, it requires a bit of understanding of what it is that you are and how do you work and what do you like in this field itself. So that would be basically some of the tips I'd throw at you. First is find your nature. Know if you're a generalist or a specialist, very important. If you're not sure, that's also fine, but just keep in mind that at some point in your career, you need to know this. Are you someone who would rather work in a creative environment, but have a high velocity, lot of different projects just speeding by you one by one? Or would you rather work in a more stable, more problem solving environment? This is more or less what an agency or a product version looks like. But I mean, it really depends on where you're applying after a point. Or are you someone who likes to work with other designers, or someone who likes more to work with the peers in tech, business, product, content, whoever, and you would like to be the design effort in that larger cross-functional team? Or do you just like working alone and taking end-to-end ownership of something entirely? So yeah, find your nature and find your niche. There's a lot of things that you can learn in product design. It's a big realm. Trying to cover it in one meeting is going to be impossible. But yeah, like what's your aesthetic? Do you like something which is visually engaging, like, I don't know, cred, for example, or do you like something which is clean and organized, like Airbnb? What's more of your aesthetic? Do you have an intuitive understanding of motion? Generally, people who do not have this, I would not recommend trying an interaction design role. But if you do have an understanding of interaction design, but you think you're good at visual as well, that's a great combination to have. And over time, polish both skills and, try and become a UI designer and then evolve that and keep growing up. Another way to find your niche is generally, do you like writing more or do you like drawing more? I, for example, like writing more. So that makes me somewhat more analytical. And therefore, I do a bit better on the UX side of thing or the problem solving side of things. Someone who tends to, draw notes or scribble visually and draw various diagrams. These are the people who are more of the visualization type of people. And generally, they work better in that sort of a role. I mean, none of these are hard ways to figure it out, of course, but eventually it's very important to know what your niche is and look at and apply for that niche only. Third, I would say, which is a must for everyone, and this is, if you're in even trying to get into this industry, this is just something you'll have to do until you die, I would say, which is build your knowledge. Just keep getting inspired, look at Dribble, Instagram, other apps on the App Store, so that you know what's possible, what looks good to you, build your taste, get onto that level, learn, there are paid courses and everything else, of course, but there's so much free material out there as well. Medium articles, podcasts, either UX podcasts or product podcasts or tech podcasts, which again, I find very useful in all of these things. Wikipedia, I mean, at least in terms of understanding some specific frameworks or psychological biases or color theory or things like that. Learn from other people's case studies and their portfolios. Moral of the story is keep learning, stay inspired, and yes, definitely collect all of this somehow. Whatever tool you want, but I would definitely recommend collecting it. Ideas, inspirations, visuals you see, interactions you like, smart copy, anything that keeps you, anything that caught your attention, you should ideally document it, because over time it just becomes very hard to, because you know what you're looking for, but it might not exist anymore, or you saw it somewhere and you don't know where it is. The better, you catalog all of this, you then get references very quickly, and it works great for you that ways. Get skilled, no surprises here, but I would put it in three buckets. First is learn the tool. This, I think most people who are interested this is the first thing that they like to do, which is learn the tool, and then they, get their first entry into what the profession is. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Maybe learn a bunch of them or get at least an overview of all of them, but definitely master them. Master the ones which are core to the the role you want to apply for. So if it's Figma, if it's After Effects, if it's Procreate, if you think it's Webflow, it doesn't matter. Just learn that tool and learn it in and out. This is effectively a prerequisite. Without this, you're not getting in anywhere. But aside from the tool, you should also look at some of the industry standard guidelines. Know the best practices, terms like 8-point grid, white space, hierarchy, all of these things should not be new words to you. They should just be something you do intuitively after a point. Know the UI UX patterns, know the difference between, all the types of selectors you can have, what a drop down is, what a snack bar is, all of these sort of things. Learn the basic principles, Gestalt principles, again, like I said, hierarchies and all those sort of things, frameworks, material design, this, that, technical terms, render, raster, PNG, whatever. Just like be very familiar with all of those things. And another thing which I would highly recommend everyone to do is exercises. So just put in 3 here, but there's a whole host of exercises you can do. Teardowns are great. Teardowns is basically you look at any existing app and then you break it into as many individual pieces as possible, and then try and figure out why is this here, why does it work, or how else could I recombine all of this into one piece. Speed runs is again great. Pick a design you like, especially if you're a visual designer or something like that, and try and recreate it as quickly as possible. A great way to make sure you know the tool and everything around it as well. Time boxing is the inverse of it, where basically you start with an abstract problem, something like how do I, get my users to do X, Y, Z, come up with random problems and time box yourself into, okay, I have to figure out an answer to this within an hour. And it doesn't matter what the answer is or what the fidelity of the answer is. I might just sketch it or even think it, and it doesn't matter. But the point is, I have to arrive at an answer to this in an hour. So these are great exercises to keep you and your skills all the time in check. This one we've covered, of course, in a previous masterclass. So won't dive too much into this, but build your portfolio. Main thing for this is don't target everyone, don't target every role, don't try to impress everyone. Just figure out your niche, like I said in earlier in this, and design a portfolio that appeals to that niche. Make sure your portfolio makes an impression, shows your problem solving skills, and keeps me engaged. Again, all covered in the previous masterclass. And another great way to build your portfolio is just work, work for free, work for cheap. I've done that, just trying to build a portfolio good enough to get somewhere, so that it's not just filled with case studies and projects and things like that. But yeah, build your portfolio over time and build exactly the portfolio that you want for your next job. And lastly is, this has become more of a expectation now, where earlier it was just a great thing to be. But talk about design, like be on Instagram, Twitter, wherever it is, and make sure you're engaging in all those conversations around what is design, what is good design, what is bad design. So express yourself, showcase your skills, knowledge, experience, or just ask questions. Don't ask very bad questions, of course, but like just ask intriguing questions, opinions, however you have to. And of course, stay humble and aim to learn. I mean, every fresher or someone new to the industry that we look at to hire nowadays, the main two things that we're looking for is, does this person know the basics, or do I have to even teach them the basics? And is this person someone who can learn quickly? I mean, these are simply the two things that will get you in. So use your portfolio to make sure everyone's very clear on the first. Your skills have to be obvious and as unquestionable as possible. If you stumped on technical questions, it's not going to go well for you. And secondly, show that hunger to learn. Of course, in some ways, when you try and build your knowledge and everything along those lines, this is going to happen anyway. But make sure you're humble, make sure you want to learn as much as possible. There's just so much knowledge in product design out there. It's honestly one of the best professions that if you can crack, it's totally worth it. But yeah, like it's going to involve a ton of learning and a ton of context and knowledge. So just keep learning, or someone else will and they'll get ahead of you. So yeah, that's the final line I would like to leave everyone with, that again, you only get there once you know for a fact what there is. Most of the people who I see trying to land a UX job, UI UX job, they are very vague, or they have very fuzzy ideas about what the profession is and demands from them. So be extremely clear about what the profession is. Where do you see yourself fitting into it? Show yourself as skilled enough for that thing, whatever it is, and keep learning. And yeah, like if you're very clear on what you want in life, you'll get it. Just be very clear on what you want in life. That's what I would say. Great. I think that's the end of this. We've run quite a bit over, I think, but let's just take as many questions as possible.
So there's Yash asking, what are the different areas of UI UX or design itself in which one can become specialist? I think you answered this. This was also earlier, but would you like to probably answer it?
I'll just, this is by no means the exhaustive list, but everything on this page, I mean, Yash, if you want to take a screenshot, go ahead. And of course, the recording will be here as well. But visual designer, motion designer, UI designer, content designer, graphic designer, illustrator, product designer, UX, copywriting, everything in this. You could theoretically be a specialist in all of this.
There's a compliment for your presentation by Meenu Pradeep, and he's asking, what font is it?
This is Geomanist. Geomanist.
There's Pallavi asking that how can she start her UX UI journey?
I mean, like I said in the masterclass, basically, first get inspired by products, by other people's work, by designs in general. I mean, I am inspired by cars. It has nothing to do with apps, but it's inspiring. So get inspired, get good at some version of product design, pick some skills you think you'll be good at and get into it. And then over time, I mean, nothing really says that you have to do it. So if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. You can find something else. But if you like it and you feel like this is what you want to keep doing over time, then find more and more ways to do it. Work for free or do case studies, tear downs, whatever. Build a bit of a portfolio and then use that portfolio as your entry into entry level job, and then run from there. That's how I would say you should get into any profession, really.
Right. There's another question that Pallavi is asking, how can they prepare their portfolio without having any experience in the UX space?
Right. Covered this again in last week's webinar, but to put it quickly, the main thing I would say is if you don't have it, you, like I said, work for free or work for cheap. There's nothing which builds real world experience. Even in a portfolio, I think if I find a portfolio that only has 5 case studies and no real work, I tend to judge it versus, and it's just natural, versus someone else who has actually worked on some real world projects. So I would say definitely try and work on something, even if it's a small piece or even if it's not for a lot of money. But yeah, eventually I would say case studies and teardowns again are good. However, like I said in last week as well, don't pretend like you know how to redesign the entire homepage of YouTube. Like, I mean, you really are that.
How can we become expert in UI UX? And how can we get started in AR and VR design?
Okay, so for the expert question, I don't have an answer. I don't think there are any experts in UI UX. Like I said, this profession's 10 or 15 years old, so nobody is an expert. But yeah, just learn and keep learning. And you'll never really be an expert, but you'll know more than most people at some point. So I guess that makes you an expert.
Right. Suraj is asking this question that he's in his BA final year. Can he switch into this particular domain or IT space?
Yeah, again, I don't. So now I think it's slightly different because, of course, there are courses specifically for UX design, product design, and such. They're coming up into the market. But even then, I mean, like 5 years ago, there was none. And I was doing BTech, but it didn't stop me from, again, doing the same things I said, right? Pick up clients and do that design work, build your portfolio effectively. We are still at that position where we won't really care about what the degree is, as long as you can show me a body of work which proves the point that you know how to design. You could be BA or BTech or anything. It wouldn't matter at this point. I mean, I can't promise that 5 years or 10 years down the line, but at least as of right now, I think it's not that big of an issue for most people.
There's another question that Puneet BR is asking, that how can we find projects for freelancing?
It's hard, but so I wouldn't recommend going online, even though that's one of the easiest ways to go about it. Something like a Fiverr or whatever one of these things is. I would ideally recommend looking into your own network, and just letting people know out there that you want to take on these sort of things. Because for one, these people are generally more willing to give you actual work, given that you haven't done any. And then, of course, there's always like small scale things you can pick up, right? Like just make your own portfolio website, or make a website just as a concept for starters. If there's a friend or a family member who needs a website, start with that. If you over time find out that you have some people in various companies or this or that, keep networking with them. They'll land a few small things your way. And it's also okay if some of the early work isn't specifically like, if you want to be a UX researcher, some of the early work might not have anything to do with UX research. It might be just general UX design or some wireframing project or this or that, but that's okay. The idea is just to get some basic stuff going. And I mean, you can go online and find some of those things as well, but um, the ROI on that is not as good as actually finding something in your own network and going that way. And of course, wherever possible, just make concept arts and concept websites. I mean, a lot of people I know have gotten hired basically by becoming good website owners themselves. Like they created their own website as a blog or as a magazine or whatever, and they just ran with it and made sure it was pretty, and then used it in their portfolio again. That look, I can create a website or something like that. So yeah, like you can come up with versions of these sort of projects if you don't find anything already in your circles.
There's a specific question by Nilesh. She's saying that he's currently working in a design agency as a UI designer and mastering projects related to UI and interactions. However, the company is something that is not satisfying his hunger or his passion to go further. What should he do? What would you recommend him?
Interesting question. I mean, there could be a lot of dimensions on which you would not feel satisfied, of course. So if I'm for the exercise, I'm assuming the answer is not pay or my boss is bad or this or that. We'll just try and keep it focused on the work itself. Best way is either try to, in an agency, it's not that hard, talk to your superiors, try and work on something else as a skill. Like if you've been doing too much UI and interaction and you're bored of it, try maybe some UX. If you're bored with the repetition of the work itself, if you're bored of some projects itself, then I would say you can, I think in an agency they won't care too much if you even ask for some other projects down the line, so swap those out. If you're bored of the fact that in an agency you're not getting to go beyond in terms of what you're designing, then I would say there's always a ceiling of what you will realistically do in an agency. A client requests for some designs, and then they're given that designs basically over a period of a few weeks and they go out. The only way outside of this is to get involved in something where you have more control over the entire process. So maybe if that is what is annoying you, you could consider going into product. And one last thing which I know happens in agencies is at some point you'll need to eventually build managerial skills, or your career growth just will not go beyond a certain point. I mean, you can join a bigger agency, be in a more specialized role there, and go along one of those sort of lines. But yeah, like eventually your growths will stagnate unless you get into the managerial side of things. So yeah, like I hope one of these answered your questions.
Absolutely. There's another question that is asked by Avira, that do you think putting out the work on Instagram or platforms like Behance can help land clients?
Absolutely. Dribble and Behance more than Instagram, simply because that's why people expect it to be. But even Instagram nowadays, and I know a lot of people who are, at least if they're not making the Instagram their portfolio, they're at least using Instagram to constantly reinforce to everyone in the circles that I'm doing UI design or I'm doing visual design and things like that. And that, of course, works because even if the person who's looking at your profile doesn't have work for you, at some point, someone will ask them, do you know anyone? And like you will come in their mind. So it has ripple effects across the chain. So yeah, Instagram is fairly decent for this, and Dribble and Behance also double up as great portfolios. So yeah, and in fact, why not just create one and put it on all three if you really want that work. So
Great. There's another interesting question, and with that, we can also sum up the questions. This is by Hema, and that's a genuine question for a couple of them as well. That with multiple sources available on internet to learn, so there's an information overload, as they say. How can one concentrate on selected sources without getting lost? Because the information seems very overwhelming in the UI UX space.
that's actually a very good question, because so what I'll be honest about is for my first year or my first 2 years, basically, I loved Medium because everything I read on Medium was effectively a new piece of information. Of course, now that I've been here for like 5, 6, 7 years, I basically know the template of an article before I've even read it, because I'm like, oh, this article is going to talk about that. So it tends to get very stagnant over time. And of course, it becomes very tricky to find good, consistent pieces or consistent resources. There are two ways to look at it. So way one is, it's okay if you have consumed all information in one field. Like, for example, I've consumed everything realistically that there is to consume related to design systems. In fact, I've created one for urban companies. So at this point, there's nothing new to consume there anyway. So in fact, I feel that I've consumed a lot in design already. So I go tangentially, like I read about psychology and statistics, and all the books I read now are nonfiction, and they talk about various things. And I read tech, I listen to tech podcasts rather than UX podcasts, because they just tell me generally what's happening in products and how did companies like Amazon and Google become successful. So it's okay if you've hit certain saturations in specific areas, because there's only a limited amount of thing to consume eventually. If your worry is how do we go around, or what's a good starting point, there is this website which I know is absolutely brilliant for this, and it's called start.uxdesign.cc. This website was primarily created to make sure everyone who wants to get into this has a good starting point. And it's a beautiful website. It's just largely broken down into 10 pages, distilling information from the best material out there for you to consume. And then you use that material, and basically, once you watched enough things on YouTube itself will keep feeding you good content, and things like that will start happening. So, but yeah, like this is a great starting point if you were to start completely fresh. Start.uxdesign.cc. And in fact, even uxdesign.cc as a website has some of the, I'm not able to connect to it for some reason. But anyway, uxdesign.cc again is a great library of design related content from some of the best designers in the world. So these are two great places to start.
Thanks a ton, Suhail. I think it was such an informative session, and thanks for patiently going over majority of questions. Thanks everyone on that note for joining us for this masterclass. Thanks, Suhail.